You ever notice how some older folks tend to pull back from the crowd? You don't see them at every gathering. They're not as chatty on the phone. They may not even return a text for days, and you wonder, are they okay? Let me tell you something. They're more than okay. They're just choosing peace, and it's completely normal. You see, as we grow older, our priorities shift. The noise of the world doesn't impress us anymore. We're not trying to prove anything to anyone. We've lived, we've loved, we've lost, and that journey teaches us to be selective. Selective about the people we allow in, the energy we tolerate, and the conversations we entertain. It's not about becoming cold or antisocial. It's about emotional self-preservation. Older adults, especially the wise ones, begin to realize how expensive their time and energy truly are. And they refuse to spend them on people who drain them, disrespect them, or bring unnecessary chaos into their lives. And let's not forget, socializing takes energy, physical energy, mental energy. And let's be honest, sometimes it just feels easier to stay home, sip some tea, water the plants, or get lost in a good book. Solitude for many becomes a luxury they never knew they needed. And here's another layer: pain changes people. Loss of close friends, disappointments in relationships, the kind of heartbreaks you can't even speak of. It teaches them to protect their space, their peace, their heart. So when an elder backs away from people, it's not rejection, it's reclamation. Reclaiming time, reclaiming joy, reclaiming peace. And maybe, just maybe, it's a quiet reminder to all of us: you don't need a crowd to feel complete. You don't need constant noise to feel alive. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is withdraw, heal, reflect, and embrace the stillness. So the next time you notice an older adult withdrawing, don't assume something's wrong. Maybe for the first time in their life, everything is finally right. As people age, something profound happens beneath the surface. A quiet, powerful transformation in what they value most. The constant chase for approval, popularity, or external validation begins to fade. There's no longer a need to be at every social event to impress anyone or to maintain relationships that no longer feel meaningful. Instead, older adults begin to focus on what truly matters to them. Their time becomes sacred, and their energy becomes something they guard with intentionality. They've learned, often the hard way, that not every connection is worth keeping, not every friendship is healthy, and not every interaction adds value to their lives. There's a clarity that aging brings. With decades of lived experience comes a deeper understanding of who they are and what they need. They no longer feel pressure to say yes out of guilt or to stay connected to people out of obligation. They've outgrown small talk and performative friendships. They crave depth, truth, and peace. And when those aren't present, they'd rather be alone than settle for noise disguised as connection. This shift in priorities isn't bitterness, it's wisdom. It's a realization that life is finite and energy is not to be wasted. Older adults begin to prioritize moments of calm over chaotic gatherings, meaningful conversations over empty chatter, and a few trusted people over large crowds. They embrace routines that bring them comfort. They spend time in environments that nourish their well-being. And they start saying no, not because they're angry or cold, but because they finally can, without guilt, without apology. And that's the beauty of this stage of life. It's no longer about doing what's expected. It's about honoring what feels right. Prioritizing themselves isn't selfish, it's necessary. They've spent years putting others first. Now, they simply understand that not everyone is meant to go with them into this new season. They're not avoiding people because they don't care. They're just learning to care differently, more inwardly, and more intentionally. There comes a point in life when protecting your emotional well-being becomes more important than pleasing others. For many older adults, this is not a conscious decision at first. It's a natural evolution. After years of emotional investment, heartbreak, disappointments, betrayals, and even personal growth, they begin to understand just how costly emotional exposure can be. So they slowly start stepping back, not out of malice or resentment, but as an act of emotional self-preservation. When you've lived long enough, you begin to recognize patterns. You learn who drains you, who lifts you, and who only shows up when they need something. Older adults aren't naive anymore. They've seen how people can mask intentions, how love can be conditional, and how some connections are built on convenience rather than care. And so they begin to pull away, not because they don't want connection, but because they are no longer willing to trade their peace for it. Emotional self-preservation means choosing inner calm over conflict. It means walking away from conversations that go nowhere, avoiding the triggers of toxic relationships, and distancing from environments that stir anxiety or discomfort. It's learning that not every comment needs a response, not every argument needs engagement, and not every invitation deserves a yes. That type of wisdom doesn't come easily. It's earned through scars and silence, through staying too long in the wrong places and giving too much to the wrong people. Older adults start to see that their peace is their power. Protecting it means everything. They become more sensitive to energy, more aware of manipulation, and far less tolerant of games. Where they once might have argued to defend their worth or explain themselves endlessly to be understood, now they simply retreat, and that is their form of resistance. A quiet, graceful exit that says, I choose me, and in that retreat there is healing. In the distance they create, they're not lonely, they're recovering. From years of emotional labor, from constantly carrying others, from pouring into relationships that never poured back, they now pour into themselves. Emotional self-preservation becomes a lifeline, a shield, a sanctuary. And if that means avoiding people, conversations, or environments that once felt familiar, so be it. Because finally, they've understood that peace isn't something you find in others, it's something you protect within yourself. As the body ages, so does the mind, and with that comes a level of fatigue that's not always visible to the outside world. Physical and mental energy is no longer as abundant or easily replenished as it once was. Things that used to feel effortless, like social gatherings, long conversations, or even casual meetups, begin to take a heavier toll. For older adults, it's not that they've lost interest in people, it's often that their bodies and minds are asking for more rest, more quiet, and more stillness than before. Social interactions, especially those that demand constant engagement, quick thinking, or extended time outside the home, can become physically draining. The energy it takes to get dressed, travel, sit in groups, and stay mentally alert for hours isn't something they take for granted anymore. Even environments that are loud or chaotic, once tolerable or even enjoyable, can now feel overstimulating. Fatigue sets in quicker and recovery takes longer. As a result, the appeal of staying in a calm, familiar space begins to outweigh the pressure to socialize. Mentally, there's also a shift. The mind carries years, sometimes decades, of accumulated thoughts, worries, decisions, and emotional processing. Cognitive fatigue isn't just about memory lapses or slower thinking. It's about the mental overload that can come from years of being a provider, a nurturer, a problem solver. By the time they reach later stages in life, many older adults are simply tired of managing people and their emotions. They begin to crave simplicity, not because they've given up on life, but because they've earned the right to slow down. There's also an invisible weight that many older adults carry. The emotional load of grief, health challenges, and personal reflection becomes a mental background noise that rarely fades. Sometimes the thought of being around others, especially those who don't understand that inner world, feels more exhausting than uplifting. It's not that they don't want to connect, but rather the effort feels too great in moments where they're already running low. And so, avoiding people isn't always a conscious decision rooted in preference. Sometimes it's a practical one rooted in self-awareness. They begin to listen to their bodies more, respond to their minds more gently, and prioritize rest without guilt. In a world that glorifies constant movement and social connection, this slowing down is often misunderstood. But to the older adult, it is both necessary and healing. Choosing solitude, minimizing commitments, and creating boundaries around their time isn't a sign of disconnection. It's a sign of honoring their limits. They've spent years pouring out energy to meet expectations, raise families, build careers, and care for others. Now it's time to care for themselves. And if that means being less available, less visible, or less social, then so be it. Because at the end of the day, peace is found not in how much they do or how many people they see, but in how well they honor the rhythm of their own body and mind. As people grow older, life inevitably brings with it a series of losses and disappointments that leave deep, lasting impressions. These aren't always the loud, dramatic heartbreaks that others see from the outside. Often, they are quiet griefs, subtle yet powerful, that accumulate over time. The loss of loved ones, the end of long-term friendships, the fading of certain dreams, or the realization that some relationships were never as meaningful as once believed. These moments all shape how older adults move through the world. And gradually, they begin to retreat. Loss changes a person. It alters the way they relate to others, and it redefines what feels safe or worth investing in. After losing a spouse, a sibling, a dear friend, or even a part of their own identity, many older adults no longer have the same emotional appetite for new connections or social circles. They know what it's like to pour into someone and then face the emptiness that follows their absence. So they start protecting their hearts, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. They understand that every bond comes with the potential for pain, and so they choose more carefully. Disappointment also plays a significant role. After decades of dealing with people who may have let them down, taken them for granted, or failed to show up when it mattered most, they begin to see patterns. They learn that not everyone who calls themselves friend behaves like one, that not every family member brings love, that not all relationships are worth holding on to. And after enough of these experiences, trust doesn't flow as freely. They no longer feel obligated to maintain appearances or entertain connections that lack sincerity. This emotional fatigue, caused by repeated loss and disappointment, can lead to withdrawal, but not in a way that should be mistaken for bitterness. Rather, it's a form of self-protection. Older adults begin to build emotional boundaries not to push people away, but to keep themselves from falling into patterns that have hurt them before. They know their limits now. They know what they can emotionally afford and what they can't. Sometimes avoiding people is simply a way to avoid reopening wounds. Certain interactions may remind them of what they've lost. A friend's laughter, a spouse's presence, a child's voice that is no longer heard. In such moments, solitude feels more comforting than conversation. Silence feels more healing than interaction. It becomes easier to be alone with their thoughts than to navigate the unpredictable emotions that come with human connection. The cumulative nature of loss also brings a new sense of realism. They no longer live in illusions. They see things for what they are. They no longer expect too much from others, and that can feel isolating. But it's also freeing, because in letting go of old expectations, they begin to rediscover themselves. In the space where people once were, they now fill the silence with reflection, prayer, music, memory, or simply peace. So, when older adults pull away, it is not always sadness or depression at play. Sometimes it's the quiet strength of someone who has survived more than they talk about. Someone who has loved deeply, lost quietly, and learned, through it all, to keep their hearts guarded and their circles small. Avoiding people becomes less about shutting the world out and more about protecting what little softness remains inside after all that life has taken. And that, too, is a perfectly human response. As people age, there's a quiet but powerful shift that begins to take root deep within. The longing for simplicity and the deep appreciation for solitude. It's not about being antisocial or losing interest in the world. It's about realizing how complicated life has been and how beautiful it feels to finally let go of that complexity. After years of juggling responsibilities, tending to others' needs, and keeping up with the demands of society, older adults often reach a place where the noise becomes too much and the silence becomes a gift. They begin to see that they don't need chaos to feel alive. They don't crave the buzz of crowds, the constant notifications, or the endless small talk. They no longer feel drawn to superficial connections or activities that serve no deeper purpose. Instead, peace becomes the priority. They find themselves drawn to slower mornings, familiar routines, quiet walks, and the kind of conversations that don't feel like a performance. In solitude, they rediscover themselves, not the roles they've played or the titles they've earned, but their truest, simplest essence. Simplicity, to an older adult, isn't about deprivation. It's about clarity. It's about surrounding themselves with what matters and removing what doesn't. It could mean fewer friends, but deeper bonds. Fewer possessions, but more meaning. Less activity, but more fulfillment. There's wisdom in choosing not to overcomplicate things. They've seen how quickly people come and go, how situations rise and fall, how fast life can shift. So they strip things down to the basics: peace, purpose, and presence. Solitude also becomes a place of restoration. It's no longer viewed as loneliness, but rather as sacred space. Time alone isn't feared, it's welcomed. It gives room for thought, prayer, creativity, and healing. In solitude, there are no expectations, no masks, no draining obligations, just quiet, just stillness. And for many older adults, that stillness is where the soul exhales. They begin to release the need to explain themselves. They stop feeling guilty for declining invitations or choosing to stay home. They no longer chase validation or feel pressure to keep up with the pace of others. They understand now that joy doesn't have to be loud and connection doesn't always require conversation. Sometimes joy looks like sitting by a window with a warm drink, listening to the wind, and knowing that in that moment everything is enough. The desire for simplicity and solitude is a natural evolution of a life that has seen enough, felt enough, and done enough. It is not a retreat from life, it is a return to self, a return to the essence of being, free from the clutter of unnecessary demands. When older adults choose to step back, to spend more time alone, to move more slowly, it's not that they're giving up. It's that they finally know what it means to truly live. And they choose to do it quietly, intentionally, and in their own beautiful, unrushed way. There's a quiet strength that begins to emerge as people age. A kind of unspoken power that comes from finally reclaiming control of their lives. For many older adults, this control wasn't always theirs to hold. Life demanded sacrifices. Careers needed building. Children needed raising. Families needed holding together. Expectations needed meeting. And for decades, many lived according to the needs, schedules, and standards of everyone but themselves. But then, almost without warning, a shift happens. A realization sets in: this is my time now. And with that comes a gentle but firm reclaiming of boundaries, time, peace, and personal power. It's not about becoming selfish. It's about becoming free. Free from the pressure to please. Free from the fear of being misunderstood. Free from the constant yes that once came from obligation, not desire. Older adults begin to recognize how much of their life they spent being available, emotionally, physically, and mentally, for others. And now, they start choosing what and who they show up for. The power of saying no becomes one of their greatest tools. No explanation, no guilt, no apology, just a clear, quiet no, because they've finally learned that their well-being matters too. This reclamation often looks like small, simple choices that carry deep meaning. Choosing rest over obligation. Choosing solitude over noise. Choosing truth over politeness. Choosing not to answer that phone call. Not attending that event. Not continuing a conversation that doesn't feel right. There's a newfound authority in their decisions. Not loud, not defiant, but steady. It comes from having lived enough to know what matters and what doesn't. For many, reclaiming control also means taking back their voice. After years of being quiet for the sake of peace, they start speaking up, not to argue, but to express their truth. They begin to trust their instincts more deeply. They no longer need external validation to feel whole. Whether it's in relationships, family dynamics, or how they spend their days, older adults start choosing authenticity over appeasement. If something doesn't sit right with their spirit, they walk away. not because they're angry, but because they now value their own peace over someone else's comfort. They may also become more protective of their physical space and energy. The world that once demanded so much of them now has to wait. They choose how and when they engage. They stop explaining themselves to people who never tried to understand them in the first place. They no longer force connection, effort, or emotion where it isn't reciprocated. And in doing so, they build a life that finally reflects their inner truth. Not one shaped by duty or expectation, but one defined by freedom and alignment. Reclaiming control of their lives isn't about cutting people off or becoming closed. It's about becoming whole. It's the sacred act of honoring what was once neglected, their own voice, their own time, their own energy. When older adults withdraw from certain people or patterns, it's not about rejection. It's about liberation. They're not escaping, they're returning to themselves, to the version of life they were always meant to live, quietly powerful, deeply intentional, and finally fully theirs. So when we talk about why older adults begin to avoid people as they age, it's not a mystery. It's a reflection of wisdom earned, peace prioritized, and authenticity reclaimed. It's about shifting from a life of constant doing, proving, and pleasing to a life of simply being. A life where energy is no longer spent on shallow interactions or forced connections, but on stillness, clarity, and emotional truth. Through physical and mental fatigue, through the weight of loss and disappointment, through the desire for simplicity and the quiet power of reclaiming control, older adults begin to redefine what connection means on their own terms. They are not bitter, they are not broken. They are simply choosing themselves, for perhaps the first time in a very long time. So let us stop assuming that withdrawal means something is wrong. Instead, let us see it for what it truly is, a form of healing, of wisdom, and of grace. Because in that silence, in that solitude, and in that sacred space of choosing peace, they are finally living life as it was always meant to be lived, freely, intentionally, and unapologetically. And that is something we should all aspire to.